Hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you from the StockPulse Network. We are down at the New Orleans Investment Conference and was excited a couple minutes ago, ran into Hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you from the StockPulse Network. We are down at the New Orleans Investment Conference and was excited a couple minutes ago, ran into a great author, Dr. Irv Arenberg, and his research assistants, Alex Tufford. And especially in today's world where we're finding out a lot of the things we were told of how things unfolded when we were growing up, not always necessarily the case. And Dr. Aaron Berg has a new book out, as he's in many ways been Vincent van Gogh's ear specialist, which perhaps you could dig into and explain and tell us about the book.
Okay, well, I was an ear doctor, the ear part of ear, nose, and throat. And about 30 years ago, I wrote an article for the Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA. It was a cover article and the special communication basically showing that Vincent van Gogh attacks that were well known in his history were actually attacks of vertigo as a result of Meniere's disease. And he actually wrote the word la vertige in his letters, and there's no other definition or translation of that. So, and that's a critical element in Meniere's disease. So I basically proved that Vincent had an inner ear disorder and not epilepsy, and that was the basis of the JAMA article, and it was only 3 pages. And so I was very focused on making that diagnosis of the Meniere's disease in that limited space, but I never really believed back then that Vincent committed suicide. I've since retired, and in the last couple of years I've been working on this book called Killing Vincent, the man, the myth, and the murder. And Vincent is probably the most iconic artist. Everybody knows about Vincent, and most everybody's heard about him cutting off his ear, that he was a little bit nuts, and that he shot himself. Well, that's the myth. That's not true. What really happened is that he was murdered. And that's what this book really goes to. And as he mentioned, there are a lot of theories out there about things that we're now finding out aren't quite true. The most amazing one of recent vintage for me is JFK. When Trump released all this information about that was suppressed about the assassination of Kennedy, the movie JFK that Oliver Stone did was absolutely brilliant, and he took all the real facts and connected that with the dots and carried it forward to an obvious conclusion. And the recently released stuff confirms that he was right on. He just didn't have the names. It was 95% accurate. So what I'm doing here is pretty much the same thing, and connecting the facts that we know and people will accept about Vincent van Gogh, his life, but more importantly, his death. There's an awful lot known about Vincent van Gogh's life. There's been tons of things written about his life, but there's very, very little was written about his death. And so what I did was I went back and connected all the dots of what was available, what was accepted, and I have, actually we're aiming to make this into a movie.
Oh, all right.
And so a lot of the screenwriting stuff is bullet pointed ready. These are the facts, this is what we know, this is what happened before, this was what happened on the day he was injured, this is what happened when he got back to the hotel, this is his deathbed scene, his wake, his funeral, and what happened after, and who told what stories and which ones can you believe, and then most importantly, why wasn't Vincent taken alive to Paris? It was less than 20 miles away, an hour by coach or train, and he lived for 30 hours after he walked in from nobody knows where. It's really important that you realize that Vincent had there was no information about where this happened. There's no weapon, there was no bullet, there was no suicide note, there was no exit wound. All there was a description of the entry wound. And so there's a lot of unanswered questions, and we tried to put them all together.
Right. And I'm curious, What was it that tipped you off initially and made you start noticing that something didn't seem right? I always find it fascinating when we find out that history might be different than what we're told in our textbooks in public educational school. You know, what was it that really alerted you and made you feel like something didn't add up?
Well, a lot of things. I mean, if you want to commit suicide, you don't shoot yourself here.
Yeah, that was a big thing.
And Alex, I know you've done a lot of the research. Did you want to comment on that?
Well, there's nothing that would even point towards suicide. I don't know why they would do that other than a cover-up, to be honest.
Right.
Yeah. They say that Vincent was a little bit crazy, and we also discussed that he wasn't really as crazy as people said. I think that he had in his clinical differential diagnosis Asperger's syndrome, which would explain a lot of his unusual behavior. And he was very frenetic, and he would paint a masterpiece in a couple hours. In the last 70 days of his life, he painted over 70 canvases and like 40 sketches. That's more than one a day, okay? To do that and accomplish that requires a lot of focused effort. Anybody watching him do that and tried to talk to him, because he did not relate well to people, would say he was a little off. Well, if he really had Asperger's, that would really explain a lot of his unusual behavior. And then you throw in the Meniere's attacks, and if anybody saw him have that and he tried to describe it, it's very difficult to explain. And in the website, we have videos of patients that I did surgery on many years ago describing what it was like to have their Meniere's attacks. And if you look at that and transcribe that in your brain to, well, this is probably what happened to Vincent, you get a better sense of what really happened to him. So that's available on the website.
Right. And Alex, what was it like for you? And I'd be curious how you got involved in the project and maybe parts of finding out about the truth maybe was similar to his experience, and maybe you had some parts that were different and you saw in a different light. What was the process like of coming across all of this?
I met him yesterday or the day before. Mm-hmm. He introduced me to the project, and I really fell in love with it. Right. I found it very fascinating, and it's really everything that I'm interested in is in this book.
Right.
Yeah, I've started reading it already since meeting him 2 days ago, and I love it. I'm very intrigued by it, and I'm very excited to start working on it.
Right.
And she's pre-med, and she's very interested in forensics. That's one of her subspecialty areas, so this just falls right into place.
Yeah.
So this is directly in your field now.
Yeah, in the fall I'm going to start working towards my forensics certificate. Right. So it is really paramedic.
And without giving away too many secrets from the books, why do you think he was killed?
Well, I'll give you the bottom line. It was an honor killing. Mm-hmm. But to tell you more would kind of dilute the book. But I think if you think that, in other words, there was no really good reason why he committed suicide. Okay, there was a lot of unusual things happening in his life, but he had come out of the asylum for epileptics and lunatics 70 days before this. They marked him cured. He stayed in there for a year. And he was much better. He had nothing to do when he was there but paint and meditate and think and get healthy. Nothing to drink, and he came out and he was fine. And he was calm, he was serene, his paintings show a different mellowness, so to speak. So there really wasn't a reason for him to commit suicide. He even bought a bunch of paints, ordered a bunch of paints the day before. So nothing really fits, no suicide note. So there's something didn't smell right, okay? And when you look at it forensically in the wound and how he did it, and they couldn't find his art. He usually went out with his art and found a place to paint. And nobody could find any of his art paraphernalia the next day or the day after. But interestingly, all of this missing stuff that everybody spent all this time looking for mysteriously appeared at his wake. So there's just a lot of things that, you kind of go, this doesn't compute. Something doesn't smell right. And if you look at the actual alleged suicide, it absolutely doesn't make sense. And a forensic specialist, Dr. DeMaio, wrote a letter to another author that supported the idea that it was impossible for Vincent to commit suicide. That was 6 years ago. What we did in the forensics is we took it to another level, and we are proving, I think, indisputably, that it was impossible for Vincent to have self-inflicted this mortal wound on himself.
Yeah, well, and it's going to be exciting for folks who want to know exactly the whys and the details behind it, that you have written the book. And perhaps the last question, just, it's interesting, you're here at the investment conference based around precious metals, where a lot of people who like to question things realize what we've been told maybe is not always the way things happen. What's the reception to the book been like as you've been meeting folks out there and talking about it?
Most people are very happy to hear it. I mean, because first of all, I think they find it interesting. Anything about Vincent is right on target. I mean, he is the most iconic artist. Everybody knows something about him, and so many people think that he committed suicide. And I think, in a sense, they're somewhat relieved to find out that he didn't commit suicide. And if he was murdered, who did it and why? And that's a good part of the book. But it is a myth. And there's some patsies in the book, and there's a lot of connected dots, and it's, like I say, hopefully it's heading toward a JFK type movie, connecting the dots.
Yeah, well, that'll be exciting to see how it all unfolds. Alex, I know you're excited about it, a little new to it, but already involved helping him with some of the research.
Yeah, I'm going to be helping write a paper, actually, that's more focused on the medical and the forensic side of all of it.
Yeah.
Looking forward to doing that.
Well, that's exciting to hear what you guys have been doing, and perhaps just in closing, can hold the book up and let folks know where they can get it.
Well, I have a sheet someplace. You can get it on Amazon. It comes in 4 formats. The hardcover is best to go to Barnes & Noble and order it. The soft covers, color and or black and white, or the Kindle you can get directly on Amazon. Okay. And there's a website, www.killingvincent.com, has a forum, and you can also read the preface, the first chapter, and the table of contents on the website. So you can go there first and sort of preview things. And then if you get interested, there's a forum, there's a blog, there's all kinds of other information about this, and there's the videos of the forensics, because the forensic studies are pretty dramatic. And we can only show single frame outtakes from that in the book, but the videos, you can actually see the bullet, you can see the fire coming out of the gun, the black powder, and in some of the video you can actually see pieces of black powder that are still red hot in flight, and it's pretty impressive. And so we did it at point blank range, 6 inches, 12 inches, 18 inches, and 24 inches. And you can see the impact, literally, of the powder and the powder burn and the significance of the powder burn.
Right. Well, Dr. Aaron Berg, I appreciate you coming by, especially for those of us like myself who should do something aside reading from about gold and silver all the time. Again, a lot of historians here like researching. And Alex, I know you mentioned you're in university, and to see something I didn't get earlier on, but getting involved and finding projects you're interested in. So it's nice to have you too, and I'm excited that you found a good partner here, and look forward to seeing how all the research turns out.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us. A pleasure to meet you. And Alex, best of luck to both of you.